In this tutorial, I want to show you editing in Reaper. But first, let's go to the options menu here. Make sure enable snapping and auto crossfade is turned off. This way your system will behave the same way as mine does, and you won't get confused. Next thing I want to do is make sure you turn on trim content behind media items when editing. If this is turned off, and you have two versions of this drum loop, and you place them on top of each other, like this, both of them will wind up playing, and it'll sound like this. It's kind of messy, and it gets kind of confusing. So as you move them around, you see they go on top of each other, they go under each other. I think that's kind of confusing. So I prefer to leave this option on. Trim content behind media items when editing. When it's turned on, and you place items on top of each other, it trims the other one. So you see? It actually trimmed that region. So as you place it on top of it, it actually cuts off the end of it. But don't worry about it, you could always pull it back out again. It's just an easy way to make sure you're only hearing one thing at a time. As you place them on top of each other, they'll trim each region. So you're only hearing one thing at a time. So let's delete this, pull this back out. So now that we got the options out of the way, let's do some editing. All the editing done in Reaper is non-destructive. So when you move things around, cut them, copy and paste them, trim them like this, the original stuff is still there. It still points to the original file in your computer. You don't have to worry about accidentally destroying anything. The original files stay intact. So if I delete this, it still exists. So let's put it back. So in Reaper, this is considered an item. You can click it, you can move it, just by simply dragging it. Grab it and drag it. If you want to copy it or duplicate it, on the PC you'll hold down Control, on the Mac you'll hold down Command, click it and just drag it. And that makes a copy of it. But again, the source file is still intact. These still point to the same file. Now, if for some reason you didn't want that to happen, you wanted to make an actual copy on your drive, you could select this. On the PC, you'll hit Alt Control. On the Mac, you'll hit Option Command and just drag it. You'll see it makes a new icon. It just re-rendered that file. So now there's actually two files on the drive. But for now, we're going to get rid of that and just work with this in non-destructive mode. You can cut it. Cut selected items. You can click anywhere. Paste it. Again, you can delete it just by hitting delete. You could undo, right here, undo delete item. Another thing you could do is you can move the item, but keep the audio intact. So if you're happy where the audio is right now, you just want to move the item itself around it. On the PC, you'll hold down Alt. On the Mac, you'll hold down Option, and then you grab it, and you see just the endpoints of the items change. But the music inside, the drum loop in this situation, stays exactly the same. So if you're happy with where the loop is sitting in the song, you just want to change the item, you could just do it simply by doing this. Now if you want to do the opposite, move the stuff inside, but keep the item intact, you add Shift to the equation. So on the PC it's Alt-Shift, on the Mac it's Option-Shift, and just drag it and move it, the stuff inside moves. But the item itself stays intact. You might want to do this if you want to wind the loop up a little tighter. So Alt-Shift or Option-Shift, drag it, and then zoom in a little closer, and you can get the beginning of this loop to be closer to the beginning of the item. Let's get a little tighter. There you go. Another thing you could do is split items. Let me just check something in the preferences for a second. Open up your preferences. Under editing behavior, right here it says move edit cursor when clicking items. If this isn't selected, and you click inside an item, it's not going to move your cursor with it. For this operation, it's better to have that turned on. So let's select this. Move edit cursor when clicking media items. Also make sure this is selected too. This will make it behave the old way when you hold Shift or Command click. So with that selected, I can just go like this, and my edit cursor moves, and then go to edit, split item at cursor. And it just made two items out of the one item. And the key command for that is S. Just quickly hit that. You can split items at the cursor. And if you want to put them all back, you can select them all. Go to Edit, Heal Splits and Selected Items, and it heals it all. Again, this is all non-destructive. Just a quick way of being able to edit by splitting them up. So let's undo those. Now we could also split items at time selection. We can make a time selection from, say, here to here. Select the item. Go to Edit, split items at time selection, and it'll split it based on the time selection. Let's undo that. You can also trim it based on the time selection. Trim items to selected area, and it trims the items, cuts off the beginning and the end. Let's undo that. Now it's important to note, when you have an item selected, it's going to do just that one. If you have nothing selected, it's going to do the entire project. So let's say I made a new track, and let's just copy this down there. Now if I make an edit selection from here to here, with nothing selected, if I select split items at time selection, it's going to do the entire project at the time selection. See, it's split there. Now if I undo it, the same thing works for this one. Trim items to selected area. With no items selected, trim items to selected area works for the entire project. Undo that. Next thing I want to show you is the tools. You have the trim tool right here. If you go right to the edge here, you see it turns into a trim tool. From there, you can just select and change the edge of your item. Same on this side. Now if you had two pieces, let's just duplicate that for a second. If you go right between the two of them, you see you get a double trim tool. This allows you to trim one to make it longer while you're making the other one shorter. So those are your trim tools. You can also edit within a selected area. Instead of editing just the entire item like this, you can work with just a selected area of the item. So if you make a selected area, say up here, and then make sure you choose the item, you can copy selected area of selected items. Not the item, copy selected area of selected items. Now when you paste that somewhere, it just pasted the selected area, not the entire item, because you're working with just the selected area. And instead of selecting up here, or even down here, you can select right in here by right-clicking. Right-click and select from the beginning to the end of the section you want to grab. Copy selected area of selected items. Then hit paste. It pastes just the selected area, not the entire item. Which brings up another cool feature. I'm going to do that for a second. Let's say we wanted to get a perfect loop of this drum loop. Let's say this was perfect. Let's listen back to it. That feels pretty good. And once you're happy with that, instead of copying selected area of selected items, you can copy loop of selected area of items. And what that does is create a loop. So I'll copy loop. Let me zoom out a little bit. So now if I paste that and then bring it out, it'll automatically loop it. You can see each one of these little pieces here is a loop of that. So it created an item and then looped it. So now if you play this, it loops perfectly. So it's a way of creating a loop. And just so you know, you can always get rid of the selected area by hitting escape. Another thing to note in Reaper is you can work on multiple items at the same time. So I can grab this region, control drag it or command drag it on the Mac, make a few copies of it. Now if I select them all, I'll hold shift. Or if you want to do ones that aren't next to each other, you can do control on the PC or command on the Mac. You can grab them that way. But for now, I'm just going to grab them all. Now if I do any kind of editing, it'll happen to all of them at the same time. So if I use the trim tool, it edits them all at the same time, in relation to each other. And that's pretty much it. That's the basics of editing in Reaper. We'll get into more complex editing later on, but for now I just wanted to show you the basics. So let's move on.